Thank you, Rocio. Please bear with me. I think this might only be my second or third harmful algal bloom subcommittee. I think most of you are familiar with Stephanie Ing. There's a lot going on today, so we're kind of splitting duties here. So I'm excited. I know that there's a great update that we had at our last meeting from the Delta Stewardship Council, our last CSC meeting, or a couple CSC meetings ago, rather. And so I know this was a point where we were eager to, whether folks were able to make it or not, at least have a discussion that we can then record and post for folks to kind of touch base a little bit, kind of in here a little bit more of the update that I know you all had to share. Spencer, kind of given that you're the co-lead for this, would you like to kind of kick us off? Does that work for you? Or I don't know if you normally have Rocio walk through the agenda, whatever works for you kind of in your leadership.
I was going to say, I'm not sure. It's been a while since I've also done a meeting because it was in 2022. I think was the last time I had a HAB subcommittee because last year we had no blooms to report. So I didn't really have anything to report aside from, hey, the water's clear. But I don't know, Rosia, if you don't mind going through the agenda. I know I was going to give an update on HABs at the end of the meeting, but this was also a space for DSC to give some more feedback on the Delta Climate Adaptation Plan. So I don't know if you want to take over from there.
Yeah, thank you, Spencer. I can go ahead and just do a brief run through of the agenda so that way folks know what we're going to cover today. So starting off with the introductions, which we're doing right now. And then we're going to have actually the Delta Stewardship Council present their climate adaptation plan back to this committee. As you all might remember, they did present at the February CSC meeting. So they just want to come back to this meeting to continue this conversation and then have more opportunities for the CSC to engage. And then at the end of the meeting at 2:45, we're going to get an update from Spencer from just some of the water sampling efforts that they have been working on in Restore the Delta. And of course, the last few minutes of the meeting, we always have time for any general comments or questions and next steps or anything that the CSC is interested in for future meetings. And that covers the agenda for today. And I'm wondering too, Jess, since we have a small group here, maybe we can do a round of introductions.
Sure.
I love that idea. Yeah. Spencer, can you kick us off and then we'll go down?
Yeah. Do you want me to popcorn to someone or just?
Yeah. That works.
Okay, that's fine. All right, then. Hi, everyone. My name is Spencer Fern. For those in the recording that haven't seen me before, I'm the Delta Science Program Manager with Restore the Delta. New title from, I guess, 2022, I guess. But I spearhead our harmful algal bloom monitoring program here at Restore the Delta. And right now, I'm right in the thick of grabbing water samples from, usually we start at the beginning of May, and then we sample all the way until the end of September, which are the hottest months of the summertime. Also coincides with when harmful algal blooms are more likely to occur. We grab those samples and then provide that data to the State Water Board to get into a public interface. We put it on our website, and then also I try my best to get to public meetings to be able to interact with the community and kind of discuss if we're having harmful algal blooms. It's popular spots that people recreate at. So it's a little bit about me, and I'm sure we'll go more into it when I'm talking about HABs information later, but I'll popcorn it over to you, Jessica, if that's fine.
That works for me. It's so nice to meet a lot of you, actually, folks that I have never met. My name is Jessica Olson. I'm the Director of Community Strategies and Resources with the Valley Air District. My team oversees this effort, which is a part of Assembly Bill or AB 617, but we also see all of the community engagement work. We are a regional air pollution control agency, so we cover San Joaquin down through Kern County. That's 8 counties of the central San Joaquin Valley. I will popcorn over to Annie.
Yes, hi, I'm Annie Merritt. I'm an environmental scientist with the Delta Stewardship Council and work on a bunch of different things, but probably the 2 biggest ones are what Morgan and I will be talking about today: our climate adaptation plan and our tribal and environmental justice issue paper. I guess I'll pass it to Morgan.
Thanks, Annie. Yeah, hi everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Morgan Chow, also with the Delta Stewardship Council. Yeah, excited to be back to this group or a subgroup of the larger steering committee and yeah, hopefully if people want to access the recording, they'll be able to learn more about like our work and how it pertains to, you know, the work that this committee is doing. So pass it to Kyle.
Thanks, Morgan. Hey, everybody. I'm Kyle Goff. I'm with the California Air Resources Board. I happen to be the CARB liaison for the Stockton community. I also happen to be the incentives expert for CARB, just in general. So yeah, I think that's it for me. I'll popcorn it over to Rocio.
Thanks, Kyle. Hi, everyone. My name is Rocio Calderon, and I am an air quality specialist in the Community Strategies and Resources Department. I work under Jessica Olson and Stephanie Ean, and I am the community liaison for the Stockton AB 617 community. And I'll go ahead and pass it off to Alger.
Yeah, it's Alder. Hi, I'm Alder. I'm a student assistant this summer for Professor Tina Chow, who I think some of you know from UC Berkeley Civil Engineering. Spencer and I met a couple times last semester because I was in a class last semester that worked on a variety of environmental issues in Stockton, including HABs as one of our projects. And we work with the AB 617 community, CARB, and Restore the Delta. So just here to watch and absorb.
Delina.
I'm just the interpreter for today, or one of the interpreters.
You are not just an interpreter. It is so important that we have equitable access to this information. So you are super important and we appreciate your time. And then I don't know who else, because I don't see them, if the other interpreter wanted to introduce themselves.
Hi, sorry, I forgot to rename myself, so I will do that. I'm Jenny, and I'm the other interpreter for today.
Hey, Jenny, thank you both for being here.
As to say, I guess with that, we can move on to the presentation, or I think.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks, Rocio, for pulling it up. Maybe just as Rocio pulls it up, I'll just remind folks, especially those that are maybe tuning in on the recording, of course, that just as a reminder, a couple of regular CSC meetings ago, thank you so much for the Delta Stewardship Council for coming to that meeting. I know, we allotted an amount of time that I think maybe allowed us to get introduced to the work that you're doing, but maybe not go as much in depth. So we're really interested and grateful that you're here today to go a little bit in depth. Talk a little bit about this work. And then I would also just say, as we think, maybe the rest of us that are more audience members, think about next steps for, I know a lot of community engagement, from my understanding, that the Delta Stewardship Council wants to do with this work, and how we can maybe move that forward for things like today, but also moving forward on, maybe getting more people to these types of events. So that's maybe my charge as we hear your update.
Thanks. Yeah. Thank you for that. And let's see, I think, well, so last time in February, we got halfway. I think I think most of you all were there, but, and because people will just be listening to the recording, I think I'll just say very quickly, like kind of a summary of what I said, and then maybe I'll pass it to Annie. I don't know, or do folks, I'm not sure, I don't know if everyone at this group is already familiar with the background, if I should go through it again. Jessica and
I think a brief review would be fine.
Okay. Okay.
Folks, yeah.
Sounds good. Yeah, so we're going to be talking about two of our initiatives. One is our climate adaptation plan that we're planning to have available for public comment next week for 60 days. And then our tribal and environmental justice issue paper, which is really like a culmination of research that we've been doing with in partnership with a lot of community organizations, including Restore the Delta, to better understand how we and others can address tribal and environmental justice issues in the region, which we're hoping will go out for public comment at the end of June. So there's a lot of focus on Stockton for both of those, and yeah, we are excited to be here and just to continue to connect with community groups around the Stockton area to make sure that your work and your priorities are reflected in these documents. So the first initiative, our climate adaptation plan, we call Delta Adapts. It was a vulnerability assessment to really understand the Delta assets that are at risk and how much so from various climate hazards, which we published in 2021. And then the second part of the project is the development of a regional adaptation plan. And really a lot of our partnerships with Stockton community organizations, I think like sort of started and solidified with this project, which has been really great. We held some community workshops in 2021 to hear from Stockton, Restore the Delta and other organization fellows and hear their reflections and what they wanted to see in the adaptation plan. So we've carried that feedback forward. The other piece is our tribal and environmental justice work. So the goals here were really to build a network of community leaders. We created an environmental justice expert group. Two groups that are participate in that are Restore the Delta and Little Manila Rising that are based in Stockton and are also on the steering committee. And that's really helped us both build relationships with those groups. There's two other groups outside of the Stockton area that are on that group, and then just learn and connect with other community organizations throughout the region. The other objective is to identify either issues. This is really the bulk of the paper. So we, in addition to monthly meetings with that group, we conducted more than 20 interviews with community organizations and tribes. And then we triangulated what we heard in the interviews with literature review, analysis of public comments to the Stewardship Council, and other various forms of input throughout the many forums and workshops that the council hosts and participates in. So yeah, that's all culminated into a paper, like I said, that will be available in June. And next slide. And for those that aren't familiar with the council, we were created in 2009 by the Delta Reform Act to really promote restoration of the Delta ecosystem, as well as a more reliable statewide water supply, while also preserving the Delta as a place, a cultural, historical place that, that provides home to many communities. We have a long-term management plan for the Delta called the Delta Plan, and about 70-person staff and a 7-member board. And we have monthly meetings that you can tune into. Next slide. So our role really in short is to implement that Delta Plan. We have a covered action authority, which requires projects to demonstrate their consistency with our plan, and an appeals process that basically allows for any entity to appeal that consistency. We've seen a few appeals since our creation, and I'll just say that yeah, a big part of our work is really like coordinating with other agencies as we implement the Delta Plan. We have an interagency implementation committee that actually recently met in Stockton. We were hosted by folks from Little Manila Rising and other folks that work with them. We went to the Edible Schoolyard as well. So we got to see some projects that are happening on the ground in Stockton with several of those agency partners. We amend the Delta Plan at times. The Delta Plan has been amended a few times. Most recently, our ecosystem chapter, which focuses on restoring the Delta ecosystem, was amended. And also before that, our chapter 7, which has regulations around priorities for Delta levy investments, was also amended. We have a big science arm. Our science program really connects decision makers with the best available science through synthesis, peer review. We have an independent science board. We fund science. There's a proposal solicitation out for science projects for the next few years. I know some of your organizations, also through the HABS work, are involved in that. We also have a separate but related Science for Communities initiative, which is really like a matchmaking for community organizations' science needs with agency and academic scientists. I know Restore the Delta and Little Manila Rising are also participating in that, and actually it's culminating. We've had one in 2022, and then the next one is happening on July 12th in Stockton at the San Joaquin Delta College. It's an all-day event, so hopefully folks will be there if they're available. And yeah, just an increasing effort as part of the science program to really pay more attention to like human aspects of the Delta, as it has traditionally been more on the biophysical scientific components of the Delta. So our staff have helped in partnership with Sea Grant and others to complete the first Delta residence survey. So it's the first like representative survey of Delta residents, really helping to increase our understanding of the various populations and their priorities, perspectives throughout the Delta. Next slide. So yeah, I realize I'm kind of just going through all of this again, but that's fine. People can fast forward if they've already heard it. So yeah, we just wanted to touch on, I think I've already said it a little bit on how we've been engaging with various groups throughout Stockton in our work. I already touched on the workshops that we did with those CBOs listed on our vulnerability assessment. We also, as part of the vulnerability assessment, our staff created a social vulnerability index. This really helped understand the communities that have both like the highest physical exposure to climate hazards, as well as several like demographic variables that make it harder to be resilient to those climate impacts. So Stockton, Pittsburgh, Antioch had the highest scores, and that's part of why we're really trying to target our efforts in terms of outreach and education and partnerships in these areas. And yeah, I think I already mentioned some of these other ways we've been working with Stockton. Some of our staff have also been participating in the Mormon Slough convenings that Restore the Delta is leading. And we're just, trying to be coordinated basically, and where we're touching down in Stockton. Next slide. So I will just talk quickly before I pass it over to Annie about big picture, what we did find from the vulnerability assessment, because it really informs what is in what our priorities are in terms of regional adaptation. We looked at stressors, so air temperature, changes in air temperature, precipitation, hydrology, sea level rise, and then focused on the resulting hazards, flooding, extreme heat, drought, and wildfire. I see a hand. Yeah, we could take your question or comment now.
Yeah, thank you, Morgan. I saw a slide. I know that it dated to 2001. It's still we're in 2024. What change have that done between the 21 to 2024? And I know that there was stakeholder input that was from that year. Is there any stakeholder that are available this year that it had been addressed at this moment? And I will, I like to see something up to current, because the weather that keep changing now with the weather saying that it's going to be hotter than it was before. So climate do have changed, and I still get. It's notable because I have asthma, and also I have AFib. And it's very hard for me to breathe if I don't get enough air. And so when the weather gets really hot, it really kind of burned. But as far as the Delta is concerned, I'm more concerned about the wildlife. Are we going to have anything like something like a fox or an owl, something that, because the desert, the delta is dead. You know, there's no wildlife. There's no there's no equality like changes, like kind of equal, like, you know, changing the water atmosphere, the molecule, all that stuff needs to be addressed. Not you know, people thinking that the delta, the toilet, you know, the big toilet. You know, to me that it's just kind of disgusting when we should have some kind of water right there. We can't even go swimming when we see somebody tell us that you can't go on a boat because it's out of the blooming. It's out of the blooming. It's out of the blooming, and there's nothing to attack that. You know what I mean? So that's an issue right there that we need to be watchful. And I think that life in water is life. So I definitely think that we need to do something about our delta. That's all I'm saying. But yes, I'd like to see that up to the date current presentation, please. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for your comments and questions. And I think I can touch on them some, and I think Annie's presentation will help address some of those comments too. But yeah, I think so. 2021 was when our vulnerability assessment was done, but I think just to clarify, a lot of what the vulnerability assessment did was project what impacts we expect, like in the next few years, in mid-century, and like in 2050, and then you know, more towards like 2085 end of century. So that is, I mean, the science is always changing, but big picture, like we're focusing on the trends and trajectories and like things that are at risk. So it's of course always important to update things, but I guess on what I'm trying to say is like the big picture information and takeaways are still the same from, you know, 2021 to now. And then in terms of the engagement, so I talked about where we started engagement for what folks wanted to see in a plan was in 2021, but we continued to meet with, I didn't focus on this, but to clarify, we met with focus groups, with folks that are working in agriculture, flood risk, water supply reliability, and ecosystem restoration over the last 3 years. And we also continually met with our environmental justice expert group and continually got input from various local, regional, and state agencies. So that engagement and feedback has been consistent. It just started in 2021. And then, yeah, I think that we can talk about it a little bit in terms of like your concerns around air quality and wildlife. Our strategies around ecosystem restoration, I think, are the pieces that focus the most on what you're talking about in terms of species, wildlife, and also just restoration. So like areas where we can provide habitat for those species and where we can like consider flows, like the Mormon Slough project that Restore the Delta is like working towards is a perfect, like a local project that would bring a lot of those types of benefits. So yeah, I think we can touch on those pieces more as we go through. Yeah, I think I'll just say, and then I'll pass it to Annie, that really big picture, the results were like flood risk is one of the most pressing threats to the Delta wide. And we know that that the flood risk is not equal. So it's very important to recognize the nuances of flood risk, and that Stockton does have areas of high flood risk. Water exports for drinking water, that is also something that was looked at in our vulnerability assessment and a focus of the adaptation plan, and just recognizing that we have to figure out ways to basically capture, you know, increases in runoff due to more variable precipitation and storms now and in the future. Same with water quality, as folks are touching on both like for human uses, for agricultural uses, for tribal uses. And then we're also looking at agriculture production, so impacts to agriculture in terms of the different temperature changes. So we have more extreme heat days. We also have less chill hours that affect specific crops. So we have strategies related to agriculture. And yeah, I think that's all I need to say big picture. I'll pass it to Annie to talk about some of the results from the vulnerability assessment specific to Stockton, and as well as what we heard from our tribal and environmental justice work.
Yeah, so you can move on to the next slide, please. All right, so yeah, I'm gonna go into a little more detail on, like Morgan said, climate change impacts for Stockton specifically. So for extreme heat, in Stockton, that's defined as a day where the temperature is 102 degrees or higher. So historically and currently, Stockton and the rest of the Delta region has experienced about 4 to 5 extreme heat days per year on average. But our vulnerability assessment showed that by the middle of the century, so by 2050, Stockton is expected to experience 25 extreme heat days on average. So that's, that's a pretty big impact and a big change. And so among Delta cities, Stockton and Tracy are expected to be the most vulnerable to extreme heat. And yeah, higher temperatures will have a number of impacts, including impacts to public health, and will increase cooling costs for homes and businesses, and cause more stress on plants and animals in our landscape. Next slide. So yeah, so wildfires. So climate change is not expected to greatly affect the incidence or the severity or frequency of wildfires within the Delta and within Stockton, but it is expected to increase wildfire risk in other parts of the state and surrounding states. And as I think we've all experienced, when wildfires happen elsewhere, the smoke can come, to Stockton, to other parts of the Delta, and that can really have a lot of impact. So with increasing wildfire risk in other areas, that will likely increase these poor air quality days. And yeah, wildfire smoke is pretty bad for people's health. It contains fine particulate matter and toxic chemicals that can worsen long-term health impacts like heart and lung disease. Or as Douglas mentioned, if you have asthma, it's definitely not good for asthma. Next slide, please. Okay, so for flooding, as Morgan mentioned, I think she mentioned this, that Stockton is expected to be the most vulnerable Delta city to flooding in the future. And also want to, a caveat and define something. So the results on this slide and that I'm talking about are just for the part of the city of Stockton that's within the legal Delta boundary, because that was our study area for our analysis. And I don't think Morgan mentioned it, but on an earlier slide, we had a map showing, the city of Stockton boundaries versus the legal Delta. And then also, so a 100-year flood event means a flood that has a 1% chance of occurring in any given year. So in our vulnerability assessment, we found that by 2050, a 100-year flood event in Stockton could expose almost 30,000 people to flooding due to levee overtopping, and that 80% of those exposed people today live in areas that we identified as having high social vulnerability, or more likely to be more sensitive and less able to adapt to flooding and other hazards. It would expose a number of other community resources. So just what's shown on the slide here, some historic sites, fire stations, some schools and parks, and then some solid waste sites and contaminated sites. And yeah, these are just, all of this is just like a sample of the impacts, and our vulnerability assessment has more detail if you're interested. So next slide. So yeah, on the left, that's pretty much a recap of what we just went through, the key climate change vulnerabilities for Stockton. But on the right here are key climate adaptation priorities for Stockton that we've heard from prior community engagement. But we really want to hear from this group, if you have other concerns, like just what your concerns are related to climate change. And we'll be coming back to this at the end with our discussion questions. But really quickly, I'll go through these. So the first one is to implement multi-benefit projects, such as the Mormon Slough project, which Morgan previously mentioned. So that's a project being led by Restore the Delta and other partners to restore Mormon Slough and its floodplain, and to provide multiple benefits like flood risk reduction, recreational opportunities, and much more. Next one is to use collaborative thinking and system-wide investments to prepare for future flood risks and raise awareness about the need for more funding for flood risk reduction. To protect vulnerable infrastructure, including Highway 99, the Stockton Airport, and Highway 4, to make outreach information accessible in communities with language and technology barriers, and get residents more involved in adaptation efforts in their communities. And finally, just the importance of different agencies coordinating across their different plans, and to really avoid asking the community to participate in a bunch of different initiatives that are similar. Yeah, so next slide, please. Okay, so switching gears really fast, but this is definitely very related. So I'll talk a little bit about our ongoing tribal and environmental justice issue paper that Morgan mentioned. So that issue paper covers climate justice issues, again, that are related to what we were just talking about with climate change, but it also covers environmental justice issues more broadly. So yeah, in our draft issue paper, we identify and discuss a number of environmental justice issues relevant to the Delta and including in Stockton. So the visual on the slide here to the right kind of shows some of the major issues that we identified and how those issues are highly interrelated. So the colored circles show some of the key kind of overarching issue areas that we identified. And so those include recreation and outdoor access, water, flooding, climate change, pollution and public health, housing and homelessness, food security and access, and tribal and indigenous justice. Yeah, next slide, please. Okay, so yeah, this is just a little bit more about one of those issue areas with a little bit more detail. So as Morgan mentioned earlier, as part of this issue paper development, we interviewed more than 20 community-based organizations and tribes that work in the Delta. And one of the big issue areas that was brought up in those interviews were just issues related to pollution exposure, which really, exacerbates public health inequities across the Delta. So our interviewees really attributed these disproportionate impacts of pollution and how it has long-term impacts like respiratory impacts and other impacts from being exposed to pollution. And they, really attributed these current issues to past land use decisions like redlining, which placed, certain communities in close proximity to industrial land uses, things like freeways, toxic waste and other sources of pollution. Yeah, and then on the right is just a quote from one of our interviewees really showing this connection between health and housing and pollution and inequity. And yeah, interviewees really specifically talked about these issues affecting South Stockton. And then a reminder, I guess, that Morgan mentioned. So we plan to have a public draft of this issue paper, hoping to have it out by late June, and we'll have a 60-day public comment period for that. So yeah, now I'll pass it back to Morgan to wrap it up.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so just one more note on how equity.
We did not know that what was being done by the
I
angel.
think someone just unmuted, maybe accidentally. So yeah, so there's a lot of overlap with our two initiatives, as Annie noted, and I just wanted to say with the adaptation plan that's coming up, really the equity considerations, that there's equity considerations with each strategy, and they are kind of focused on a few different themes. So one is representational justice. So really for every decision, every strategy, just working towards having decisions and decision-making bodies represent the communities that they serve, and ensuring that communities most impacted by decisions are involved in the process. So we really highlight the importance of partnering with organizations and tribes on projects early and sustained. The other piece relates really to like our ongoing work and understanding the communities that are most socially vulnerable to climate, is who faces the most risk and who needs the investments the most. So that can be around flood risk and levee investments, or just other flood resilience actions that can be around access to green space and green infrastructure to help, mitigate the impacts from things like extreme heat that can be for water quality and water supply, particularly for small water systems. And the last is really recognizing the need to amplify our efforts and with our partners around like risk communication and education about really all of this content. Next slide. So this really just shows sort of like where we started in 2021 with, our input from different types of groups and our vulnerability assessment findings, and really kind of how we got to the draft plan that we are now almost have out. The strategies are organized according to those 4 focus areas, and there's both physical and management type strategies that are proposed. We have information on the regional differences for adaptation, which, like the Stockton issues in the surrounding area are not the same as those in Clarksburg, for example. We have proposed implementation leads for agencies that make the most sense to lead, not necessarily according to like their regulatory authority, but like leadership on the topic and the work. We tried to start to do some prioritization in terms of what we think needs to happen first. But I think that's going to be an interesting thing to get like public comments from the public on. And we also started to just try to understand like how much regional adaptation will cost, because we really want to kind of come up with like a regional funding strategy with a lot of our partners to make a lot of this happen. So yeah, that's really all from us. Like Annie and I mentioned, we really want to connect more with folks in Stockton as well as Antioch and Pittsburgh and other areas throughout the Delta, as we're, in this period, to get people sort of acquainted to who we are as an agency, what's in this document, to have, mutually beneficial relationships so that we can really like elevate Stockton priorities into this regional plan. We have a few questions on the next slide for the group. And I think in addition to, you can go to the next slide, to what Jessica mentioned, we'd love to connect more with other groups and events. We're familiar with the RISE Coalition and with the regional climate collaboratives. I think there's a lot of overlap with the organizations that participate, but we're always happy to present or just go to community events. Future engagement with the broader steering committee. Reactions to what you've heard today. I know some folks are maybe more familiar than what we shared than others. So I'll stop there. I don't know how much time we have for discussion, but we can also follow up with individuals after if they're interested.
Thanks. This is Stephanie. Thanks, Morgan and Annie, and good afternoon, everyone. Sorry, Jess helped cover the beginning of the meeting. I so appreciate it because I had a conflict. But we have about 15-ish minutes for questions, and I do see we already have a hand up. So go ahead, Douglas.
Morgan, I liked your presentation. It was really encouraging that we need to put more emphasis on community engagement. I think that what we do, I think we need to be educated on our surrounding and what can we do to make every day an Earth Day. You know what I mean? Really get educated to as far as just for not just air quality, but also what our climate changing as well. And I noticed that down in the bottom, you are a concern related to climate change that is in the document that you would like to see reflected in the adaptation plan. What does that mean? Is that able to bring people in to discuss the variation of equal system for environment to introduce and see whether or not we're able to make the Delta come alive again and able to enjoy the water or the species, other stuff that you were just talking about, I mean, and also the other agency can able to solve other solutions. I know that Sacramento and I believe not Sacramento, I take that back. I think Lake Tahoe, they were putting like little fishes back into in the in the Lake House City. I'm not sure. It's been a while. I don't remember. Was that or they were taking and they were trying to build the lake up, as far as mercury or other stuff that is in danger for people to go in nowadays. So I want to see that not happen, prevent that. But other agency, I know that you said that if it's that if the agent that is right for you, you'll go with that plan. What did that mean when you said that? That's all. But other than that, I was really encouraged by your presentation and everything else. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for listening and for your comments. And I don't know if I fully heard your specific question, just so I can make sure I address.
The question is, like you said, that you could bring other agency to help out with the adaptability plan. And I wonder, that was the question, the main question. What did it mean? Adaptation plan mean? Is that the ecosystem that we were talking about, or what is that, please? That's all. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. So I think what we presented is what we're calling a regional adaptation plan. So we hope that it can act as like a blueprint or a framework for all of the many entities that are working around the Delta region. So Stockton included and beyond. So that's government within the plan. We sort of divide the approaches according to topics. So what can be done for agriculture that faces several vulnerabilities to these various climate hazards that we're talking about, and who would lead addressing how agriculture is vulnerable. And then we do the same thing for flood risk, water supply reliability for folks that live in the Delta and folks that receive Delta water. And then we do the same for ecosystem, what you've raised a lot of points around, and where are the areas that we have noted that are feasible for restoration to various types of habitat, and where do we want those to happen? Who's involved? How can we make these happen? What are the barriers? What are the strategies to, like you said, bring back wildlife species, native habitat. So that's what the plan is in a nutshell. It's like a long-term plan it is also a dot. We've had all these conversations. There's a lot of groups working in the region. There's a lot of priorities, and this is our best way of laying them out and starting to coalesce all of the groups working in these various ways to work together. So that's sort of like, yeah, does that help answer your question on what it is? Okay, well, we can always go back to that point if there's more questions.
This is Stephanie, and Morgan, you might, Douglas, let us know if that didn't answer your question, but I do see another question from Douglas. Can Delta help farmer irrigation?
So irrigation is definitely like a component of our agricultural strategies. And we did talk with several farmers and growers throughout the Delta. We had 7 different group interviews to hear really the challenges that growers are facing today, and how they're starting to adapt, and what they need to adapt in the future. So it kind of depends on where you are in the Delta and what you're farming and what type of irrigation system you have. But yeah, that's definitely a component of this plan. And we also have leaned on our partners at the Department of Food and Agriculture, who have a lot of incentive programs to help farmers work with, water supply and quality challenges and things like that.
But the question was how to our subcommittee can get involved with that adaptation plan. Do we have input on what? Like, for example, you come to us in the group and say, okay, this is what we're going to be facing. These are the problems. What can we do to solution, and how much money we're going to put into this category? So that will help benefit the Delta. So that's the idea that I'm trying to convey from you guys. I'm trying to get involved. That's all, to the community subcommittee.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think that we would leave that to you to tell us how you want to be involved. We have this draft plan, so the plan will be available for you to read, and you could submit comments, and we can, do our best to incorporate those comments into the final plan. So I think that's, yeah, what we're definitely asking of groups that, we also are taking like your verbal feedback, but I know you haven't read the plan yet. So yeah, we would love for this group to come together and review the plan as it makes sense for your steering committee.
And this is Stephanie from the Air District. Definitely, Morgan, whenever. It sounds like June is the timeline that you all are releasing it. Did I hear that correctly?
Yeah, we're hoping to have it next week. We're really just working through like ADA requirements and things like that.
Perfect. This is Stephanie. Ooh, go ahead, Annie.
Our other effort, the Tribal and Environmental Justice issue paper, we're hoping to release that draft by the end of June. But yeah, Delta Adapts hopefully will be next week.
This is Stephanie. That's really awesome. And whenever it's available, please let us know, and we're happy to share it with the whole committee. I know that in our main meeting, this was a really high priority topic and folks were interested in it. So I'm sure that they'd be happy to see it in their inbox.
Yeah, for sure.
This is Stephanie again. I see a few other folks on here. Wondering if anyone else has any questions, any reactions to the presentation.
I was going to say, Stephanie, I've got to give an update on HABs before the end of the meeting too. But
yeah,
I'll keep the floor open before I do that, if that's the case.
I think we can take if anybody thinks of a question, raise your hand or just pop it in the chat. But I think just in the interest of making sure you have space for your update, let's pass it to you, Spencer.
Okay, so I'll be really quick. Good news, no HABs. But we've started testing since May 1st, or I guess April 30th, because that was the first week of May. But we've grabbed samples every single week, and we haven't seen a single bloom or toxin up to this point. We did send off samples to Ben Genetics in Sacramento, but they're what tests kind of like the more in-depth toxins from the samples we take, and they tested on ELISA kits. I'm just talking about what they're testing, but essentially it's so that they can find out if there are more toxins in those waters that we can't test with our own test strips here in the lab. Aside from that, I know it's been a while since I've had an update for harmful algal blooms, and I know I mentioned in the beginning, but we didn't have any blooms in 2023. But in 2022 we did, and that's when I was giving regular updates here. Ideally, that trend continues, but I'm here to test every week just to make sure that if it does occur, the information is getting put out there. And I mentioned that these get uploaded to our website. They get sent over to the State Water Board, the reports that we have out in the field, and those end up on their websites. But I guess just a few like updates since then. There is through Delta Stewardship Council, actually, there's a partner monitoring framework for harmful algal bloom monitoring throughout the state that's currently being worked on. As Restore the Delta, we're trying to put some input for that, as well as some of the other non-government organizations throughout the Bay Delta estuary. And it's promising. I feel like that's going to be a great way to standardize the way that data is collected, so that when we're looking at data, it'll be the same data everywhere. And then also, on another side related tangent, we're also working together with USGS, DWR, or US or United States Geological Survey, Department of Water Resources, and a few other government water agencies to test for different types of things throughout the estuary through a MURHAB. And I apologize, the acronym for that one, it's not coming to me right now. I'll try to remember that for the next meeting. But that process right now is testing throughout the entirety of the bay to the delta to kind of see what the transfer of toxins from freshwater to saltwater as it gets saltier, essentially. And it's been interesting work. I was actually able to go out and sample with some folks from US Geological Survey last week with because I was covering for one of our interns. But that's work that's being worked on right now. Results aren't necessarily there yet, but when there's more data on that, and if I'm privy to it and it's not confidential, I can bring it up here. But that's basically the short and skinny on harmful algal blooms in this area for at least right now. Margot, you have a question?
Yeah, thank you, Spencer. Good to hear that you're not finding any on your tests yet. What is there a theory about that? Is it we had a nice heavy rainy year again? And
so I'm glad you asked that, because last year we had record snowpack, which also meant that there was a lot of freshwater flow coming through our river systems during the summer months with the snowpack melt off. Now this year we didn't have anywhere close to last year's snowpack, so I'm curious to see if we'll have harmful algal blooms. I mean, just from what I see, I would think we might have some as soon as it starts to get a lot hotter and the snowpack is fully melted off. So if I were to put a guess on it, and I'm not saying it's going to happen, I would guess probably when we start to get to 100-degree weather, maybe middle of June, late July, if I were to make an educated guess. But that's ideally we don't see blooms, but if that's going to be my guess, because that's when I'm assuming everything's going to melt off. But I guess it's time for that. Yeah.
Thanks,
Sorry.
Spencer, for that update. I think that it's such great news. Will you remind us how long is Restore the Delta? How long do you all sample for during the summer?
Yeah. So we sample every year. It changes a little bit every each year, but on a general basis, it's going to be the start of May until the end of September, because that's the end of September is right when the water year ends. So it's a nice little bow tie on the rest of the water year is what we try to do.
This is Stephanie again. And for folks that I know that this is a subcommittee that hasn't met in a minute, and part of that is I think a lot of the activity does happen during the summer. And so we'll work with Spencer to continue to kind of schedule these through the summer as they continue to test and have updates for us. We are getting to the end of the hour, so I just wanted to see if there were any last comments from any folks on the call. Douglas, Margot, Alder. I think there's someone who doesn't have their name, but for anyone, see if there's any last questions from the group. I'm not seeing any, and maybe Annie or Morgan, any last comments from you all for the group?
No, just none from me. Just thanks for having us. And yeah, we look forward to your thoughts on the draft plan. We'll keep you posted when it's out.
All right. Thank you all for being here. Thanks, Morgan and Annie, for coming a second time to be with our group. And we'll certainly share out the draft plans whenever they're available. And with that, I'm happy to end our call with just 1 minute to spare.
Sweet. Well, yeah, thanks everybody for coming out.
Thank you all for the info.